Sarah never imagined that attending her college reunion would expose the cruelest side of people she once called friends. When whispers about her failing marriage turned into vicious gossip right in front of her, she had no idea that her quiet husband Michael was listening from the shadows. What happened next would silence every tongue and reveal a truth so shocking that it would forever change how these women saw success, love, and the danger of assumptions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started with Sarah Chen staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of their small apartment, trying to convince herself that attending her 10-year college reunion was a good idea. Her fingers traced the simple gold band on her finger, a modest ring that had cost Michael 3 months of his entry-level salary when they got married 5 years ago. The invitation had been sitting on their kitchen counter for weeks, and every time she looked at it, a knot formed in her stomach. Sarah had always been the quiet one in college, the scholarship student who worked 2 part-time jobs while studying business administration. While her roommates spent weekends shopping and partying, she was either in the library or serving tables at the campus cafe. She graduated with honors but without the connections that seemed to matter so much in their social circle. Her classmates had gone on to marry doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs, posting their glamorous lives across social media like perfectly curated magazines. Michael emerged from the bedroom, adjusting the collar of his simple navy polo shirt. He worked as a freelance consultant, spending most of his days at their tiny kitchen table with his laptop, taking calls about projects Sarah never fully understood. When she asked about his work, he would smile and say he helped businesses solve problems. Nothing more exciting than that. They lived modestly in a 1-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, drove a reliable but unremarkable sedan, and their idea of a fancy dinner was the Italian place down the street that had cloth napkins. The reunion was being held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the kind of place that made Sarah feel underdressed even in her best outfit. She had spent an hour choosing what to wear, finally settling on a black dress she had bought for Michael's company Christmas party last year. It was elegant but simple, the kind of dress that would help her blend into the background if the evening became uncomfortable. Michael insisted on driving her even though she had planned to take public transportation to save money. As they pulled up to the hotel's circular driveway, Sarah watched luxury cars discharge women in designer dresses and men in expensive suits. A valet approached their modest sedan with barely concealed disappointment, clearly expecting something more impressive. Michael squeezed her hand gently, sensing her nervousness. He had always been remarkably perceptive about her moods, able to read her anxiety before she even acknowledged it herself. The hotel lobby was a symphony of marble and crystal, with classical music floating through speakers hidden somewhere in the ornate ceiling. Sarah felt her shoulders tense as she approached the registration table where a woman she vaguely recognized from her marketing classes was checking in guests. The woman's eyes swept over Sarah's simple dress and moved on quickly, as if cataloging and dismissing her in the same moment. The ballroom was decorated in their school colors, with blown-up photographs from their college years displayed on easels throughout the room. Sarah found her name tag and pinned it to her dress, noticing how some people had professional headshots attached to theirs while hers featured the same photo from their senior yearbook. She accepted a glass of wine from a passing server and began the delicate dance of reacquainting herself with people she had barely known a decade ago. The evening started pleasantly enough. Sarah exchanged polite conversation with former classmates, hearing about careers in pharmaceutical sales and real estate development, children's private schools and vacation homes. She shared that she worked as an administrative coordinator for a non-profit organization, helping coordinate community outreach programs. The responses were polite but brief, conversations that died natural deaths as people's attention drifted toward more interesting prospects. It was during the cocktail hour that Sarah first noticed the glances. Rebecca Martinez, who had been the social coordinator for their sorority, was holding court near the bar with 3 other women Sarah recognized. They were the type who had always seemed to glide through college on a combination of confidence and connections, the ones who knew which professors to charm and which parties to attend. Rebecca caught Sarah's eye and waved her over with the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Rebecca had married a plastic surgeon and lived in a sprawling house in the most exclusive suburb in the city. Her diamond earrings caught the light every time she moved her head, and her dress was clearly from a boutique that Sarah had only seen in magazines. Standing next to her were Jennifer Walsh, now Jennifer Blackwood, who had married into old money, and Lisa Kim, whose husband owned a chain of successful restaurants. The 4th woman was Amanda Foster, who had become a partner at a prestigious law firm and wore her success like armor. The conversation began innocuously enough, the usual catching up about jobs and families. Sarah mentioned that Michael was a consultant and that they were thinking about buying a house soon, carefully omitting that they had been saving for 3 years just to accumulate enough for a down payment on a modest starter home. She listened as the other women discussed their children's private schools, their recent renovations, and their plans for European vacations. It was Rebecca who first made the comment that would set the tone for the rest of the evening. She was describing her recent kitchen renovation, complete with imported Italian marble and custom cabinetry, when she glanced at Sarah with what might have been pity. The conversation had naturally turned to home improvements, and when Sarah mentioned that she and Michael were still renting, the atmosphere shifted subtly but unmistakably. Jennifer leaned in with the kind of concerned expression that women perfect when they want to appear caring while delivering judgment. She asked gentle questions about Michael's consulting work, questions that seemed innocent but were clearly designed to probe the financial stability of Sarah's marriage. When Sarah admitted that his income varied from month to month depending on his projects, she saw the exchange of glances between the other women. The questions became more pointed as the evening progressed. Amanda, with her lawyer's precision, asked about Sarah's career plans, whether she was thinking about graduate school, if she and Michael were planning to have children soon.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Each question felt like a gentle excavation, digging into the foundations of Sarah's life to assess its stability. When Sarah mentioned that they were taking things slowly, focusing on building their life together, Rebecca's smile became almost condescending. It was Lisa who first voiced what the others were clearly thinking. She mentioned a mutual acquaintance whose husband had also been a freelance consultant, emphasizing the word consultant with air quotes, before revealing that the marriage had ended when the woman discovered her husband had been essentially unemployed for months. The story was delivered with the kind of false sympathy that barely concealed gleeful gossip, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn as she realized the parallel they were drawing. The conversation took on a momentum of its own after that. Rebecca shared her theory that men who couldn't provide stability were often compensating for other inadequacies. Jennifer nodded knowingly, mentioning how important it was for women to be realistic about their partner's potential. Amanda, ever the legal mind, pointed out that prenuptial agreements existed for a reason, particularly when one partner's financial situation was uncertain. Sarah tried to defend Michael, explaining that he was brilliant at what he did, that his clients valued his insights, that he had chosen consulting because he preferred the flexibility it offered. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears, or worse, to be interpreted as the desperate justifications of a woman trying to convince herself that her marriage was solid. The other women exchanged looks that spoke volumes, the kind of wordless communication that women perfect in groups, conveying pity, superiority, and judgment without saying anything directly. The breaking point came when Jennifer suggested, with the kind of gentle cruelty that wealthy women had perfected, that Sarah might want to consider developing a backup plan. She couched it in terms of female empowerment, saying that every woman should be prepared to support herself, but the implication was clear. They believed Michael was unreliable, possibly even a failure, and that Sarah was naive for trusting him with her future. Rebecca added fuel to the fire by mentioning how expensive everything was becoming, from healthcare to housing to starting a family. She painted a picture of financial pressures that would strain any marriage, particularly one where the primary breadwinner's income was unpredictable. The conversation had the veneer of concern but felt more like a systematic dismantling of Sarah's choices, her marriage, and her husband's character. What made it worse was the way other reunion guests began to drift toward their conversation, drawn by the intensity of the discussion. Sarah found herself at the center of a growing circle of former classmates, all listening as Rebecca, Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda dissected her marriage with the precision of surgeons and the enthusiasm of gossips. Some of the listeners looked uncomfortable, but others seemed fascinated by the drama unfolding. The humiliation reached its peak when Amanda suggested that Sarah might want to consider going back to school, perhaps getting an MBA, so she could have career options when Michael's consulting work inevitably dried up. The suggestion was delivered with lawyer-like precision, each word carefully chosen to sound helpful while delivering maximum damage. The implication was that Sarah's marriage was doomed, that Michael was incompetent, and that she needed to prepare for the inevitable divorce. Sarah felt tears threatening to spill as she stood there, surrounded by people who had once been her peers but now felt like judges and jury. She had come to the reunion hoping to reconnect with old friends, maybe share some laughs about their college days, and instead found herself defending her marriage against women who seemed determined to prove that their success made them qualified to evaluate everyone else's choices. The worst part was the way they delivered their cruelty with smiles, couching their attacks in the language of friendship and concern. They spoke about Michael as if he were a burden Sarah needed to shed, a mistake she needed to acknowledge before it was too late. They painted her as naive, possibly even delusional, for believing in a man who clearly couldn't provide the lifestyle they thought every woman deserved. As Sarah stood there, feeling smaller with each passing moment, she noticed movement near the ballroom entrance. A figure in a simple dark suit had entered quietly and was standing near the back of the room, partially hidden by one of the large floral arrangements. The lighting was dim enough that she couldn't make out who it was, but something about the posture seemed familiar. She dismissed the thought, too focused on trying to maintain her composure in the face of the ongoing character assassination of her husband and her marriage. Rebecca was in the middle of explaining how important it was for women to marry men with clear career trajectories when Sarah finally found her voice. She started to speak, to defend Michael once again, but her words were cut off by Jennifer's knowing laugh. The sound was like breaking glass, sharp and dismissive, and it carried across the ballroom like a signal to everyone present that something entertaining was happening. The circle of listeners had grown larger, and Sarah realized that her personal life had become the evening's entertainment. Former classmates who hadn't spoken to her in a decade were now witnessing the most humiliating moment of her adult life, watching as 4 women systematically destroyed her confidence and her marriage with the efficiency of a demolition crew. What Sarah didn't know, as she stood there fighting back tears and trying to find words to defend the man she loved, was that the figure by the entrance had been listening to every word. Michael had arrived early for their planned meeting time and had witnessed the entire conversation. He had heard Rebecca's theories about inadequate men, Jennifer's suggestions about backup plans, Lisa's cautionary tales, and Amanda's legal advice about protecting herself from her husband's inevitable failure. He had watched his wife's shoulders slump with each cruel word, seen her face flush with embarrassment and pain, witnessed her struggle to maintain dignity in the face of systematic humiliation. And he had made a decision that would change everything, not just for Sarah, but for every person in that ballroom who had participated in or witnessed the destruction of a woman's faith in her own choices. The stage was set for a revelation that would expose not just the cruelty of the women who had spent the evening dissecting Sarah's marriage, but also the dangerous assumptions that people make when they mistake appearance for reality, simplicity for failure, and quiet confidence for weakness. Michael stepped forward from the shadows, his footsteps deliberate and measured across the marble floor of the ballroom. The conversations around Sarah's circle began to fade as people noticed the quiet man in the simple dark suit approaching. He moved with a confidence that seemed at odds with his modest appearance, his expression calm but carrying an intensity that made several guests instinctively step aside. Sarah noticed him first, her eyes widening with a mixture of relief and mortification. She had hoped to spare him from witnessing this humiliation, but there he was, having heard every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every suggestion that their marriage was doomed to failure. Her heart sank as she realized he must have arrived early and listened to the entire character assassination. Rebecca was still mid-sentence, explaining her philosophy about women needing to be practical about their romantic choices, when she noticed the shift in the room's energy. She turned to see what had captured everyone's attention, and found herself looking at a man she didn't recognize. Her eyes swept over his unremarkable suit, his simple haircut, his lack of obvious wealth markers, and she dismissed him as quickly as she had assessed him. Michael stopped directly behind Sarah, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The gesture was protective but not possessive, supportive without being controlling. Sarah felt some of her tension ease at his touch, even as her embarrassment deepened. She hadn't wanted him to see her like this, stripped of dignity by people who should have been friends. The conversation had completely stopped now, with Rebecca, Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda all staring at the newcomer with varying degrees of curiosity and annoyance. The circle of onlookers seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen, though none of them could have predicted what was coming. Michael's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet but carried clearly through the suddenly silent space. His words were directed at Sarah, but everyone could hear them. He asked her if she was ready to leave, if she had enjoyed catching up with her old friends, if there was anything else she wanted to do before they went home. His tone was gentle, caring, completely devoid of anger despite what he had witnessed. Rebecca, apparently deciding that this unremarkable man posed no threat to her evening's entertainment, stepped forward with her most condescending smile. She introduced herself as if she were conferring an honor, mentioning her husband, the plastic surgeon, and their beautiful home in the exclusive Riverside Estates neighborhood. She spoke to Michael the way wealthy people often spoke to service workers, with practiced politeness that barely concealed their sense of superiority. Jennifer joined the introduction, her diamond wedding ring catching the light as she gestured. She mentioned her husband's family business, their children's private school, their recent trip to the French Riviera. Her tone suggested that she was educating Michael about what real success looked like, giving him a glimpse into a world he could never access. Lisa added her credentials to the conversation, describing her husband's restaurant empire and their plans to open a location in New York. She spoke as if she were sharing privileged information with someone who would be impressed by such achievements. Amanda, not to be outdone, mentioned her partnership at the law firm and her recent victory in a high-profile case. Through all of this, Michael listened politely, nodding at appropriate moments but saying very little. His demeanor remained calm, almost serene, as if the display of wealth and status was mildly interesting but ultimately irrelevant to him. This reaction seemed to frustrate Rebecca, who was accustomed to her achievements making a more significant impression. It was then that Rebecca made the mistake that would change everything. With Sarah standing right there, she began to repeat some of the concerns they had been discussing about unstable career choices and the importance of financial security in firm. She spoke to Michael as if Sarah weren't present, explaining that they had been advising their old friend about being realistic in her expectations. Michael listened without interruption as Rebecca outlined their theories about consulting work being code for unemployment, about men who couldn't provide stability, about the importance of women having backup plans. Jennifer chimed in with her thoughts about career trajectories, while Lisa added her cautionary tales about failed marriages. Amanda contributed her legal perspective on protecting assets and preparing for inevitable disappointments. Throughout this recital, Michael's expression never changed. He didn't defend himself, didn't interrupt, didn't show any signs of anger or hurt. He simply listened as four women systematically dismissed his worth, his career, his ability to be a good husband to the woman he loved. The crowd around them had grown larger, sensing drama but not understanding its true nature. When the women finally finished their litany of concerns and advice, Michael reached into his jacket pocket. The gesture was casual, unremarkable, but it would prove to be the moment that shifted the entire dynamic of the evening. He pulled out his phone, a device that looked expensive but not ostentatiously so, and made a call. His voice remained conversational as he spoke to whoever answered. He mentioned that he was at the Grand Meridian Hotel and that there had been some confusion that needed to be addressed. He asked if someone could come down to clarify a few things, speaking as if he were requesting a simple favor rather than summoning assistance. The call lasted less than 30 seconds, but something about his tone made several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. Rebecca rolled her eyes at what she perceived as a pathetic attempt to appear important. She made a comment about people trying to look significant by making mysterious phone calls, her voice dripping with disdain. Jennifer laughed, suggesting that maybe Michael was calling his consulting client, air quotes around the word consulting. The mockery continued, with Lisa and Amanda joining in with their own theories about what kind of help an unemployed consultant might be summoning. The women's confidence was absolute. They had spent the evening establishing their superiority, demonstrating their success, proving that they understood how the world really worked. In their minds they were dealing with a failure of a man who was dragging down their former classmate, and no phone call was going to change that fundamental reality. Michael pocketed his phone and continued to wait patiently. He made small talk with Sarah, asking about people she had spoken with that evening, whether she had enjoyed seeing the old photographs, if the food was good. His manner was so normal, so unremarkable, that some of the tension in the room began to dissipate. People started to think that whatever drama they had been expecting might not materialize after all. That changed when the ballroom doors opened and 3 people entered with obvious urgency. They moved through the crowd with purpose, their eyes scanning the room until they located their target. The first was an older gentleman in an impeccably tailored suit, followed by a younger woman carrying a leather portfolio and a man who had the bearing of someone accustomed to handling security matters. The older gentleman approached Michael with unmistakable deference. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of respect reserved for someone of significant importance. He addressed Michael by name, apologizing for the delay and asking how he could be of assistance. The title he used made several people in the crowd do double takes, though most didn't immediately understand its significance. Rebecca, Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda watched this interaction with growing confusion. The older gentleman was clearly someone of importance himself, based on his bearing and the quality of his attire, yet he was treating Michael with the kind of respect they had never seen directed toward someone so obviously ordinary. The cognitive dissonance was visible on their faces as they tried to process what they were witnessing. Michael introduced his wife to the 3 new arrivals, all of whom treated Sarah with immediate and genuine respect. They asked about her well-being, whether she needed anything, if there was any way they could make her evening more comfortable. The concern in their voices was real, not the performative courtesy that wealthy people sometimes displayed. It was the younger woman who provided the first real clue about what was happening. She mentioned that the hotel's management had been notified of the situation and were standing by to address any concerns. She spoke in the language of someone accustomed to handling crises for very important people, her words carefully chosen but loaded with implications. The security specialist, meanwhile, had positioned himself where he could observe the entire room. His presence wasn't threatening, but it was unmistakably professional. Several guests noticed him and began to whisper among themselves, wondering what kind of situation required that level of attention. Michael finally turned his attention to the four women who had spent the evening dissecting his marriage and his worth. When he spoke, his voice remained calm and measured, but there was steel beneath the quiet words. He began by acknowledging their concerns about his career, their advice to his wife, their theories about financial stability and marriage. He thanked them for their interest in Sarah's well-being, though his tone made it clear that their interference had been neither welcome nor appropriate. He addressed each of their criticisms directly, not defensively, but with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were worth and didn't need to prove it to anyone. Then came the revelation that would silence every voice in that ballroom. Michael Chen wasn't just a consultant, he was the founder and CEO of Chen Strategic Solutions, a company that had revolutionized how Fortune 500 companies approached digital transformation. His firm had guided some of the largest corporations in the world through complex technological and organizational changes, generating billions in value for their clients. The older gentleman who had rushed to assist him was the hotel's owner, a man whose own net worth exceeded that of everyone else in the room combined. The younger woman was Michael's chief of staff, someone who managed a schedule that included meetings with heads of state and corporate leaders whose names appeared regularly in financial news. The security specialist was necessary because Michael's work often involved sensitive information that could move markets, but the most stunning revelation was yet to come. Michael didn't just run a successful consulting firm, he was the principal owner of Chen Enterprises, a holding company that included technology startups, real estate developments, and venture capital funds. His personal net worth exceeded that of anyone Rebecca, Jennifer, Lisa, or Amanda had ever met, including their wealthy husbands. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. People who had been whispering among themselves fell completely quiet as the implications sank in. The modest man in the simple suit, the one they had dismissed as a failure and a burden to his wife, was worth more than everyone else in the room combined. Rebecca's face had gone white. The plastic surgeon she was so proud of marrying, the exclusive neighborhood she lived in, the designer clothes she wore as badges of success, all of it suddenly seemed insignificant in comparison to what they were learning about the man they had spent the evening mocking. Jennifer was visibly shaking, her old money confidence evaporating as she realized she had just insulted someone whose wealth made her family's historical success look modest. Lisa kept opening and closing her mouth, unable to form words as she processed the fact that her husband's restaurant chain was a corner store compared to Michael's business empire. Amanda, the lawyer who prided herself on reading people and situations, looked as if she had just received the worst news of her professional career. Her legal training had failed her completely, leaving her unable to assess the most important factor in the room, who really held the power. But Michael wasn't finished. He addressed the crowd that had gathered to witness Sarah's humiliation, speaking directly to everyone who had participated in or enjoyed the evening's entertainment. He talked about the assumptions people make based on appearance, the cruelty that masquerades as concern, the way wealth is used as a weapon against those perceived to have less. He spoke about his choice to live modestly, to dress simply, to avoid the displays of wealth that so many people seem to require for validation. He explained that true confidence didn't need external validation, that real success was measured by the quality of relationships and the positive impact one had on the world, not by the labels in one's closet or the car in one's driveway. The hotel owner stepped forward to announce that the evening's expenses would be covered, that any guest who wished to leave early would have their transportation arranged, and that the hotel's management deeply regretted that any guest had been made to feel unwelcome. His words were diplomatic, but the message was clear: the establishment would side with the person who mattered most, and it wasn't the women who had turned the reunion into their personal theater of cruelty. One by one, the people who had participated in or witnessed Sarah's humiliation began to drift away. Some left the ballroom entirely, suddenly remembering other commitments. Others moved to different parts of the room, desperate to distance themselves from the scene they had found so entertaining just minutes before. Rebecca, Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda found themselves increasingly isolated as their former audience abandoned them. The power they had wielded through social dynamics had evaporated the moment real power entered the room. They tried to apologize, to explain that they had been concerned for Sarah's welfare, that they hadn't meant any harm. Michael listened to their attempts at damage control with the same patient attention he had given their earlier attacks. When they finished, he simply said that their true characters had been revealed not by their words alone, but by their delight in diminishing someone they had once called a friend. He noted that their concern for Sarah's welfare had looked remarkably similar to entertainment at her expense. The chief of staff approached Michael quietly, mentioning that there were several matters requiring his attention the following day: international calls to return, a board meeting to prepare for. She spoke in the casual manner of someone discussing routine business, but her words served to emphasize the vast difference between Michael's actual responsibilities and the failure they had assumed him to be. Sarah, who had been silent through most of the revelation, finally found her voice. She didn't address the women who had attacked her marriage, didn't defend her choices or justify her happiness. Instead, she simply took her husband's arm and said she was ready to go home. Her dignity, which had been under assault all evening, was fully restored not by Michael's wealth, but by the obvious love and respect in their relationship. As they prepared to leave, Michael made one final statement to the room. He said that he hoped everyone would remember this evening not as entertainment, but as a lesson about the danger of assumptions and the cruelty that could masquerade as concern. He expressed hope that people would think twice before using someone else's perceived misfortune as their own amusement. The ballroom that had been buzzing with conversation and laughter earlier in the evening was now subdued and uncomfortable. People spoke in whispers if they spoke at all, processing what they had witnessed, and perhaps examining their own behavior. The reunion that was supposed to be a celebration had become something much more serious, a reckoning with the kind of people they had become. Rebecca, Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda left separately, each finding excuses to avoid facing the others. Their triumphant evening had become their most humiliating experience, witnessed by dozens of people who would remember and retell the story. The social dynamics that had given them power had turned against them completely. The hotel owner personally escorted Michael and Sarah to their car, apologizing again for the evening's events. Michael accepted the apology graciously, but made it clear that his wife's treatment reflected poorly on the establishment's ability to maintain a respectful environment for all guests. The message was subtle but unmistakable: there would be consequences. In their car, driving home through the quiet city streets, Sarah finally allowed herself to process what had happened. Her husband, the man she had married for his kindness and integrity, was one of the wealthiest people in the state. The modest life they had been living was a choice, not a necessity, and he had chosen it to be with her, to build a real relationship based on love rather than financial interest. Michael explained that he had planned to gradually reveal his success to her, that he had been waiting for the right moment to discuss their future and the opportunities his wealth could provide. He had never wanted money to be a factor in their relationship, had treasured the fact that she loved him for who he was rather than what he could provide. The revelation changed nothing about their love but everything about their possibilities. They could travel, could support causes they cared about, could help their families and friends in ways Sarah had never imagined. But Michael made it clear that he wanted to continue living simply, to remain the man she had fallen in love with, wealthy or not. The story of the reunion spread quickly through their former classmates' social networks, though the details varied depending on who was telling it. Rebecca, Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda found themselves dealing with consequences they hadn't anticipated. Their own social circles began to question their judgment, their character, their fitness for the positions they held in their communities. The hotel implemented new policies about guest behavior and staff training to ensure that such incidents wouldn't occur in the future. The owner, personally embarrassed by what had happened under his establishment's roof, made substantial donations to organizations that fought discrimination and supported victims of bullying. Sarah returned to her work at the nonprofit with a new perspective on her role and her possibilities. With Michael's support, she was able to expand the organization's programs, helping more people while maintaining the mission that had drawn her to the work originally. Her colleagues noticed a new confidence in her, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her interactions with clients and community members. Michael continued his consulting work, but with Sarah's knowledge and support, he began taking on more projects that focused on social impact rather than pure profit. They used their resources to support education initiatives, community development programs, and organizations that help people who had been marginalized or dismissed by society. The most important change, however, was in their relationship itself. The events of the reunion had tested their marriage in ways they couldn't have anticipated, revealing not weakness but incredible strength. They had faced public humiliation and emerged more united, more confident in their choices and their love for each other. When people asked, "Is Sarah?" And people asked Sarah about that night, she would say that it taught her the most valuable lesson of her adult life, that true worth isn't measured by external markers but by character, kindness, and the courage to remain authentic in a world that often rewards pretense over substance. Her marriage wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, built on a foundation that no amount of gossip or assumption could shake. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.